The smell of antiseptic is the first thing I remember. It is a sharp chemical stink that sits high in the nostrils, refusing to fade. You might expect me to say, I remember the fear, or the sound of my mother weeping, or the crushing weight of the humidity in the lower hive. But memory is a traitor. It discards the important things and keeps the trivial. I remember the antiseptic because it was the smell of authority. In the hive, everything smells of recycled sweat, cooking grease and ozone. The air is thick enough to taste a soup of human exhaust that you breathe in and out 1,000 times a day. But the processing center smelled clean. It smelled like a hospital or a morgue. It smelled like a place where mistakes were erased. I was standing in line, sandwiched between a man who smelled of fungal rot and a woman whose prayer beads clicked incessantly against her belt. There were thousands of us. We were a gray river of humanity winding through the rusted canyons of the transit hub. The ventilation fans overhead churned, sluggishly chopping the heavy air with a rhythmic thud-thud-thud that felt like the heartbeat of a dying animal. I was 19. I was good at mathematics. I had clean hands, or as clean as they could be in the mid-levels. I thought that mattered. I thought the universe operated on a system of merit. If you worked hard, if you were loyal, if you kept your head down, the Imperium would notice. I was naive. You would have been too. The line moved with the slow, grinding inevitability of a glacier. Every few minutes, the voxcasters mounted on the walls would bark a string of numbers, index codes, ident tags, lives reduced to data strings. When a number was called, someone would step out of the line guided by the prods of the local enforcers. Most people looked terrified. To be noticed by the administration is usually a prelude to disaster. A tax audit, a conscription into the penal legions, a disappearing act. But I didn't feel fear. I felt a nervous, vibrating anticipation. I had applied for the Shola. I had taken the aptitude tests. I believed I was destined for a desk, a robe, and a life of service in the high spires. I wanted to be part of the machine, not just fuel for it. We reached the front of the processing barrier after 6 hours. My legs were numb, but I stood straight. The official behind the desk wasn't human, not really. He was a servitor, a lobotomized cyborg, half man, half accounting ledger. His skin was waxy and gray, stretched too tight over a skull that had been fitted with brass data ports. One of his eyes was a red optical lens that zoomed in and out with a wet, clicking sound. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. He scanned my ident chip with a beam of red light that felt like it burned the skin of my wrist. Index 74 Kalen, the servitor droned. The voice was synthesized flat, stripping the name of any identity. It was just a label. Status marked. Priority Alpha. My heart hammered against my ribs. Priority Alpha. That sounded important. It sounded like success. I looked back at my parents. My father was holding his cap in his hands, twisting the fabric until his knuckles were white. He looked small. I had never thought of him as small before, but under the gaze of the imperial architecture, under the shadow of the Aquila stamped on the wall, he was microscopic. He nodded to me. A single jerky nod. It was pride. I'm sure it was pride. He thought I was going up. He thought I was going to a place where the air didn't taste like rust. Proceed to gate 4, the servitor said, already looking past me to the next soul in line. Do not linger. Deviation is heresy. I stepped through the barrier. It was a simple metal gate, waist-high, painted with black and yellow hazard stripes. But crossing it felt like stepping off a cliff. The noise of the crowd, the coughing, the shuffling, the murmuring prayers instantly receded. The air on this side was colder. The floor was polished plasteel, not the grated mesh of the hive. My boots squeaked. It was a lonely sound. I walked toward Gate 4, a massive blast door flanked by 2 soldiers in carapace armor. They weren't local enforcers. Their armor was black matte and light-absorbing. Their faces were hidden behind rebreather masks that hissed with every breath. They didn't move as I approached. They were statues of violence waiting to be animated. "Index 774, Kalen," I said. My voice sounded thin in the vast, high-ceilinged hall. I was told to report. One of the soldiers looked at a data slate in his gauntleted hand. He didn't look at me. He tapped the screen a single decisive motion. Confirmed, his voice growled through the Vox grill. It was deep, distorted by static. "Board the transport. Sit." Silence. The blast doors hissed open. A ramp descended, revealing the interior of an armored personnel carrier. It was dark inside, lit only by dim red tactical lights. I walked up the ramp. I expected seats. I expected a shuttle for functionaries. Instead, I saw benches of cold metal running along the walls. There were no windows. There were only restraint bars. I sat down. The metal was freezing, sucking the heat straight through my trousers. There were others inside already, a dozen of them. Men and women, mostly young. None of them looked like scholars. One was a ganger with tattoos, climbing up his neck, shivering violently. Another was a girl younger than me, staring at her hands as if she had never seen them before. No one spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy pressurized. It was the silence of prey that knows a predator is listening. I wanted to ask them why they were here. I wanted to ask if they were going to the Scola too. But the soldier's command echoed in my head. Silence. So I said nothing. I folded my hands in my lap. I tried to look composed. I told myself this was part of the test. The Imperium demands discipline. They were testing our resolve before trusting us with the secrets of administration. I held on to that lie. I polished it until it shined. It was the only shield I had against the creeping cold that was seeping into my bones. The ramp hissed and began to lift. Through the narrowing gap, I caught one last glimpse of the processing center. I saw the gray river of people. I saw the servitor with the red eye. I tried to find my father in the crowd, but he was gone. Swallowed by the mass, erased by distance. The ramp slammed shut with a finality that rang in my ears like a gunshot. The locks engaged with a heavy mechanical thunk. Then the darkness was absolute. The red tactical lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the faces of my companions look like skulls. The engine roared to life beneath us. It wasn't the coughing sputter of a hive transport. It was a deep, smooth, whine, high-grade turbine technology. The floor vibrated. We began to move. I could feel the acceleration pressing me back against the cold metal wall. We weren't just moving forward, we were moving up. The angle of the bench shifted. We were climbing. Climbing out of the mid-levels past the upper spires toward the sky I had never seen. Time lost its shape in the dark. It might have been an hour, it might have been 3. The only constant was the vibration and the cold. The air inside the transport was recycled, but it was different from the hive air. It was scrubbed too clean. It tasted metallic, bitter. It tasted like ozone and static electricity. The girl across from me started to weep, a soft hitching sound. The ganger next to her didn't look at her. He was staring at the floor, rocking slightly back and forth. I saw his lips moving. He was praying. Not to the Emperor, I think. To something smaller. Something that might actually listen. I closed my eyes. I tried to picture the desk I would have. I tried to picture the robes. I tried to imagine the taste of real water, not the recycled sludge we drank in the hab blocks. I constructed a future for myself in the dark, brick by brick, to keep the fear at bay. I was Index 704 Kalen. I was Priority Alpha. I was special. The transport shuddered. The engine pitch changed from a whine to a low throbbing bass that I felt in my teeth. Gravity shifted again, becoming lighter, then heavier, then vanishing for a stomach-churning second, before slamming back down. Atmospheric entry. Or exit. We were leaving the planet. The realization hit me not with excitement, but with a sudden vertical vertigo. I was in space, the void, the domain of angels and monsters. I had never been more than 10 kilometers from my birth hab, and now I was floating in the nothingness. The vehicle stopped with a lurch. The sound of magnetic clamps engaging clanged through the hull. We had docked. The silence returned deeper than before. We waited. The air in the transport cycled hissing as pressure equalized. Then the door at the far end of the compartment, not the ramp we entered but an airlock door, began to cycle open. Steam vented from the seal, obscuring the view for a moment. White fog rolled over the floor, curling around our boots. Through the mist, I saw figures. They were tall, much taller than the soldiers at the processing center. They wore carapace armor, but it was bulkier reinforced, painted a glossy, wet black. They held shock batons, not rifles, and on their chests, they wore a sigil I didn't recognize. Not the Administratum cog, not the Imperial eagle. It was a symbol of a gate with a lock in the center. A voice boomed from the mist. It didn't sound like a man's voice. It sounded like grinding stones. Disembark, single file, eyes down. I stood up. My legs were stiff. The girl who had been crying couldn't move. She was frozen, clutching the edge of the bench. One of the figures stepped into the transport. He moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone so heavily armored. He grabbed the girl by the arm and hauled her up. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cruel either. It was the way you pick up a sack of grain. Efficient. Indifferent. Move, the figure said. I walked toward the mist. I stepped over the threshold. The air that hit me was freezing, far colder than the transport. It bit exposed skin like teeth. I was standing on a metal deck, vast and cavernous. The ceiling was lost in shadow kilometers above. The walls were lined with cells, thousands of them, honeycomb structures rising into the dark. And there was a sound, a low, pervasive hum. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't ventilation. It was a sound that you felt in the back of your skull, a pressure that made your nose bleed if you focused on it too long. It was the sound of a headache waiting to happen. It was the sound of a million nightmares being suppressed by force. I looked at the floor as ordered. I saw the boots of the man in front of me. I saw the scuff marks on the deck plates. But my curiosity, my fatal flaw, made me glance up. Just for a second. I saw the side of the ship we had docked with. It wasn't gray like the Navy ships. It was black. Absolutes black. It drank the light. And written on the hull in gold lettering letters 10 meters high was a name in high Gothic. I couldn't read it all, but I recognized the class designation. My breath caught in my throat. The cold turned into ice in my veins. The future I had built in the dark shattered into a million jagged pieces. This wasn't a transport to the Scola. This wasn't a government office. It was a black ship. The tithe ships. The vessels that came to collect the witches, the mutants, the psychers. The vessels that took things away and never brought them back. But I wasn't a psycher. I wasn't a witch. I was Kalen. I was good at math. There had been a mistake. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell the armored giant that there was an error in the paperwork, that I was Index 7-4, and I was in the wrong line. The giant turned to me. His visor was a blank black slab. He raised the shock baton. Silence, he whispered. And for the first time in my life, I understood the true meaning of the word. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of hope. I lowered my head. I stepped into the line. I walked into the belly of the beast, and the door closed behind me. What would you like to do next? I can proceed immediately to Chapter 2. The induction, where Kalen undergoes the physical processing and receives the null brand. The sound wasn't a noise. It was a texture. A low, grinding vibration that you felt in your teeth and behind your eyes before your ears even registered it. They call it the dampener hum. On the black ships, it is the only constant. It is the sound of psychic potential being strangled in the crib. It felt like standing under a high-voltage power line, that static prickle that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Except here, it never stopped. It pressed against the temples, a dull, throbbing weight. I stood in a processing bay that was vast enough to swallow a hive block. The walls were black metal, slick with condensation. The air was frigid, kept just above freezing to inhibit bacterial growth, and I suspected to keep us docile. There were hundreds of us, the priority alpha recruits, standing in rows on the grating. We were stripped, not asked to undress. Stripped? Servitors with scissor hands moved down the lines, slicing through fabric with mechanical indifference. My tunic, my trousers, the boots my father had saved 3 months of wages to buy, they fell to the floor in tatters. The servitors swept them into waste chutes without pausing. Nakedness in the hive is a vulnerability. It means you have nothing left to steal. But here, in the freezing air of the induction bay, it meant something worse. It meant we were biological components. We were being reset. I shivered, my skin pebbled with cold, hugging my chest. I looked to my left. The ganger who had prayed was gone. The weeping girl was gone. The sorting had already happened, and I hadn't even noticed. "Step forward," a voice boomed. It came from everywhere and nowhere, amplified by Vox grills hidden in the shadowy ceiling. I stepped. The floor was ice cold against my bare feet. A metal claw descended from the gloom above. It clamped around my waist, cold and unyielding. I didn't fight. You don't fight the machine. You endure it. Another claw grabbed my head, holding it rigid. Then came the razor. It wasn't a blade. It was a laser cutter, humming with a distinct, angry pitch. It passed over my scalp, burning the hair away in seconds. The smell of singed keratin filled my nose, choking me. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. The claw held me fast. In 10 seconds, I was bald. I was naked. I was trembling. And I was terrified that this was the end, that I was the fuel. But then the claws released me, and I was shoved forward. Not into a cell, but toward a station manned by a human. He was old, his face a map of scars, wearing the black carapace armor of the ship's crew. He held a device that looked like a heavy pistol, glowing with a dull orange heat at the tip. "Turn," he grunted. I turned. I felt the heat before the touch, then agony. A white-hot spike of pain at the base of my skull, right on the vertebrae of the neck. It hissed. My skin blistered and popped. I wanted to scream, but the air froze in my lungs. It lasted for 3 seconds, an eternity. Then he pulled it away. I fell to my knees, clutching the back of my neck. The pain was blinding, pulsing in time with the ship's hum. "Stand up, acolyte," the man said. He didn't offer a hand. "The null brand is set. If you ever leave this ship without authorization, it will detonate. If you try to remove it, it will detonate. If you die, it will detonate. You belong to the Astra Telepathica now." Acolyte. The word cut through the pain. Acolyte meant student. It meant servant. It didn't mean prisoner. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me vomit. I wasn't the cargo. I was the crew. I was safe, or so I told myself. I stood up, my legs, shaking the fresh burn throbbing against the cold air. The next station was a conveyor belt of equipment. I was thrown a bundle. Heavy black fabric, hard ceramite plates, boots. I pulled them on with clumsy frozen fingers. The fabric was rough, abrasive against my raw skin. The boots were heavy magnet-soled. The armor, a flak chest piece, and greaves locked into place with magnetic clicks. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. It was as if they had measured me before I even knew I was coming. I put on the helmet last. The world narrowed to a slit of green-tinted vision. The HUD flickered to life, scrolling biological data. Heart rate elevated, cortisol critical. Loyalty pending. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of a partition. I didn't see Kalen anymore. I saw a silhouette. I saw a drone in black armor. I looked like the monsters that had taken me. A senior warden walked down the line. He was immense, a towering slab of muscle and armor. He stopped in front of me. He held out a weapon. It was a suppression shotgun, short-barreled, ugly, designed for close quarters and massive stopping power. It smelled of gun oil, a scent I would come to associate with the only comfort available in this place. Uniform, he barked, pointing to my chest. Sigil, he tapped the silver lock and gate emblem on my shoulder. Weapon. He shoved the shotgun into my chest. I grabbed it instinctively. It was heavy. Cold. A weapon? I stammered, my voice sounding tinny inside the helmet. To fight. Them. I gestured vaguely toward the deeper parts of the ship where the screaming had started to drift from. The senior warden laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound like sandpaper on bone. He leaned in close, his helmet touching mine. No recruit. They are weapons. You are just the hand that holds the leash. And this, he tapped the shotgun in my grip. This is not for them. Their minds can flay the skin from your bones before you can pull a trigger. He paused, letting the hum of the ship fill the silence. This is to use on yourself if you fail, if the whispers get too loud, if you start to like the sound of them. Do you understand? I stared at the gun. I understood. The relief I had felt earlier evaporated. I wasn't safe. I wasn't special. I was just a barrier. A fleshy, expendable wall between the cargo and the crew. I understand, I whispered. Louder, he roared. I understand, I shouted back, the Vox caster in my helmet cracking with the volume. Good. Fall in. We were marched out of the induction bay and onto a catwalk. Below us, through the metal grating of the floor, I saw the other processing line. The line for the cargo. I stopped. I couldn't help it. I looked down. They were being herded like cattle. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children. Some were screaming. Some were catatonic. They were naked, shivering, just as I had been. But they weren't getting uniforms. They were getting chains. Heavy, rune-etched chains that glowed with a faint, painful light were being welded onto their wrists and ankles. Collars were snapped around their necks, connected to the dampener system. I saw a woman try to run. She didn't get far. A warden down there simply raised a hand, and her collar sparked. She dropped like a stone, convulsing. But it wasn't the violence that froze my blood. It was the feeling. Even from up here, even through the dampener hum, I could feel them. It was a sensation of pressure, of wrongness, like the air itself was sick. I saw a child no older than 7 look up. He looked right at me through the grating. His eyes were entirely black. No whites, no irises, just voids. For a second, the hum in my head stopped, and I heard a voice, not in my ears, but inside my brain, clear as a bell. "Help me," I gasped and stumbled back from the rail. The senior warden shoved me forward hard. Eyes front, acolyte. Do not look at the cargo. To look is to invite the taint. I walked. I marched. My boots clanged on the metal deck, a rhythm of obedience, but my hands were shaking on the shotgun. I had thought the black ships were prisons. I thought they were cages for monsters. I realized then, as we marched into the gloom of the lower decks, that I was wrong. This ship wasn't built to keep them in. The chains, the dampeners, the collars, they were strong, yes. But looking into those black eyes, I knew they were fragile. This ship was built to keep the universe out. It was a bubble of ignorance floating through hell, and the bubble was leaking. I gripped the shotgun tighter. I remembered the warden's words, to use on yourself. For the first time, that sounded like mercy. The blast doors ahead cycled open, revealing a corridor that stretched into infinite darkness. The hum got louder. We marched in. They call it quarters. That is a generous word. It was a coffin violently inserted into the ship's bulkhead. 3 meters long, 2 meters wide. The ceiling was low enough that I could not stand fully upright without scraping the helmet I was no longer allowed to take off. The walls were unpainted steel, etched with microscopic prayers of warding that looked like scratches from a desperate animal. There was a bunk, a slab of metal with a thin, chemically smelling mat. There was a waste unit, and there was a Vox speaker mounted directly at ear level. This was home. This was the reward for survival. I sat on the edge of the bunk. The silence here was different. In the induction bay, the silence was vast, filled with the echo of machinery. Here, the silence was pressurized. It pressed against the eardrums. It was the silence of a held breath. I stared at my hands. They were encased in black gauntlets now. I flexed the fingers. They didn't feel like my hands. They felt like servos. I tried to summon a memory of my mother's face, of the way the sunlight hit the hive spire at dawn. But the memories were slippery. They slid away, replaced by the image of the black-eyed child. "Help me." The voice still echoed in the wet meat of my brain. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to crush the thought. The Vox speaker crackled. It wasn't a sudden noise. It was a gradual bleed of static that resolved into a voice. The Vox interlocutor. The teacher. "Welcome, acolyte," the voice rasped. It sounded like it was speaking through a mouthful of gravel. "You are here because you are empty. We will fill you. You are here because you are silent. We will give you a voice. But first, you must learn the law." I sat rigid. I didn't answer. I knew enough not to answer a recording. Rule 1, the voice hissed. Silence. Speech is a vessel for heresy. Words are the seeds of doubt. You will speak only when commanded. You will speak only in the codes of the wardens. To speak casually is to invite the warp to listen. Do you understand? I nodded in the dark room. Then, realizing the machine couldn't see me, I whispered, "I understand." My voice sounded foreign, muffled by the helmet. Rule 2. The voice continued ignoring me. Deafness. You will hear things. You will hear weeping. You will hear promises. You will hear the voices of your dead kin begging for water. These are lies. The witch uses sound to crack the mind. When you hear the whisper, you do not listen. You recite the catechism of hate until the whisper drowns in your own blood. I swallowed hard. The taste of ozone was thick in my throat. I had already failed Rule 2. I had heard the boy. I had listened. Was I already corrupted? Was the seed already planted? I gripped the edge of the bunk until the metal groaned. Rule 3. The interlocutor droned his voice, dropping an octave, becoming a vibration in the floor. Ignorance. You do not think about the cargo. You do not wonder who they were. You do not wonder where they go. They are not people. They are biological hazards. To empathize is to lower your shield. To pity is to open the door. A slot in the door hissed open. A small, heavy object slid onto the floor with a metallic clatter. I reached down to pick it up. It was a key. A heavy iron key longer than my hand, with a complex magnetic bit at the end. The head of the key was shaped like the double-headed eagle, but the eyes were gouged out. Rule 4, the voice said, and this time it sounded almost hungry. Transparency. You are a vessel of the Emperor. You have no secrets. If you feel fear, you report it. If you hear a voice, you report it. If you have a dream, you report it. If you do not report, you are concealing. If you conceal, you are a traitor. And we cleanse traitors. I held the key. It was cold. So cold it burned through the glove. It was the key to the cells. It was the key to my duty. But as I held it, I realized it was also the key to my own cage. I was the jailer, yes, but I was also the prisoner. There was no difference. The walls were the same. The air was the same. The fear was the same. "What do we hear, Acolyte?" The voice demanded suddenly. It wasn't a recording anymore. It was live. He was watching. Listening. I jumped, my heart hammering against the plasteel chest plate. I scrambled for the correct answer, the one I had been taught in the bay. "Nothing, sir," I stammered. "I hear nothing. Only the dampeners." "Wrong," the voice snapped. The static spiked a burst of painful white noise. "We hear potential. We hear heresy, waiting to be born. And we are the sound of it being crushed." "Do you accept this burden?" I looked at the key in my hand. It felt like it weighed 1,000 kilos. It was the weight of every soul on this ship. If I said no, the door would never open. The gas would come. I would be incinerated in this metal box. "I accept," I said. "Then begin." The vox cut out. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with expectation. The lock on my door disengaged with a heavy hydraulic thud. It swung outward, slowly revealing the corridor. My first shift began. A 20-hour patrol. A walk down a single endless corridor of gray metal and sealed doors. I stepped out. The hallway stretched into the distance, curving slightly with the hull of the ship. The lights were dim, flickering strips of lumens that buzzed like dying insects. I started to walk. Left foot, right foot. The sound of my boots was a thunderclap in the quiet. I clutched the shotgun to my chest. I stared straight ahead. But the corridor felt alive. It felt like the throat of a great beast, and I was walking down its gullet. I didn't look at the doors. I didn't listen to the hum. I just walked. But the silence stayed. It followed me. And for the first time, I realized that silence wasn't peace. Silence was just the universe holding its breath, waiting to scream. They call it the spine. It is the main arterial corridor running the length of the prisoner containment deck. It is 3 miles long, a perfectly straight tunnel of brushed steel and rivet work. The ceiling is lost in a tangle of conduit pipes and cabling that drip condensation like cold sweat. The floor is a metal grate that looks down into the ventilation shafts, where fans the size of hab blocks churn the recycled air. It is the most lonely place in the universe. My job was to walk it, back and forth, for 20 hours at a time. There is a specific torture in monotony. The human mind craves pattern, but it also craves variation. When you deny it variation, it starts to eat itself. The first hour was easy. I was alert. I was terrified. I gripped my shotgun so hard my gloves creaked. I scanned every shadow, waiting for a breakout, waiting for a witch to burst through a bulkhead with lightning dripping from their fingers. But nothing happened. There was only the walk. Click-clack. Click-clack. The magnetic soles of my boots engaging and disengaging with the deck plates. It was a rhythm that dug its way into my skull. Click-clack. Left foot. Click-clack. Right foot. It became the metronome of my existence. By the 5th hour, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by a dull, aching fatigue. The armor, which had felt like a second skin in the induction bay, now felt like a lead weight. The straps dug into my shoulders. The helmet felt like it was crushing my neck. And the smell? I began to notice the smell. Underneath the ozone and the chemical sting of disinfectant, there was something else. Something cloying. Something sweet. Like rotting flowers or old incense burning in a closed room. It was the smell of thousands of unwashed bodies, thousands of terrified souls seeping through the air filtration seals. It coated the back of my throat with a film I couldn't swallow away. I tried to count the doors to keep my mind sharp. Door 001, sealed. Door 002, sealed. They were identical. Heavy blast doors with small reinforced viewports that were shuttered black. There were no handles on the outside, no keypads. These doors only opened from the control center, or with the heavy magnetic key hanging at my belt. Door 400, sealed. Door 401, sealed. My mind began to drift. I found myself wondering about the occupants. Were they sleeping? Were they standing right on the other side of the metal, listening to my footsteps? Did they know I was just a boy in a suit of armor? Or did they think I was a machine? Focus. Acolyte, I whispered to myself, breaking the silence. The sound of my own voice startled me. It sounded jagged, unauthorized. I clamped my mouth shut. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. Rule 1. Silence. By the 15th hour, the hallway began to warp. I wasn't sleeping. The stim injectors in my suit kept my eyes wide open, but my brain was misfiring. The shadows stretched. The condensation dripping from the pipes sounded like whispers. Drip, drop, die. I saw movement in the periphery of my visor. Just a flicker. A shadow detaching itself from the wall. I would spin around, shotgun raised heart, hammering against my ribs ready to kill. And there would be nothing. Just the empty gray corridor. Just the endless row of doors. Just the hum. I realized then that the danger wasn't an attack. The danger was the silence. The silence was a canvas, and my mind was painting monsters on it. I started to hate the sound of my own breathing. In, out, in, out. It was too loud. It was too human. I wanted to be like the servitors. I wanted to be able to turn off. Door 8 left, sealed. Door 8 left 1, sealed. My legs were numb. I wasn't walking anymore. I was falling forward and catching myself with my feet. The 20-hour shift felt like 20 years. I forgot what the sun looked like. I forgot my father's face. All I knew was the gray metal, the sweet rot in the air, and the rhythm. Click-clack. Click-clack. After the first week, I stopped counting the days. Days don't exist in the void. There is only the shift, and the sleep, and the shift. I stopped counting the doors. I stopped looking for the shadows. I started counting the screams I didn't hear. I was passing Sector 4 near the end of a shift that felt particularly endless when the rhythm broke. It wasn't a sound. It was a light. Above door 101, a single red lumen flashed. It wasn't a warning light for a mechanical failure. It was a request light, a distress signal. But not from the prisoner, from the sensors inside the cell. Biosign fluctuation. Containment unstable. I stopped. The silence of the corridor rushed back and deafening now that my footsteps had ceased. I looked at the light. It pulsed like a slow, infected heartbeat. Red, black, red, black. My Vox bead crackled to life, making me jump. Acolyte Kalen. The senior warden's voice growled, stripping away the numbness instantly. Sector 4. Cell 101. Nutrient dispenser malfunction reported. Investigate manually. I stared at the door. Manually, sir. Manually. The mechanism is jammed. Clear it. Resume patrol. I swallowed. My throat was dry as sand. Acknowledged. I stepped toward door 1001. The red light bathed my armor in the color of blood. I reached for the heavy magnetic key at my belt. My hand was shaking. The numbness was gone. The fear was back. And it was worse than the boredom, because now I had to open the door. The senior warden met me at the door. He didn't run. Wardens never run. He materialized from the shadows of the corridor like a storm front, his boots landing with heavy, deliberate thuds. He carried a suppression shield and a shock maul that crackled with blue energy. I felt small beside him. My shotgun felt like a toy. He didn't look at me. He looked at the red light pulsing above the door. Protocol, he growled. Weapon tight. Visor down. Do not speak to the cargo. Do not touch the cargo. I will secure the perimeter. You clear the jam. 10 seconds. In and out. I nodded. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely align the magnetic key with the slot. I forced myself to breathe. In. Out. I slammed the key home. The mechanism groaned, a sound of metal protesting against rust and disuse. The heavy locking bolts retracted with a series of concussive bangs. Clang! 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 The door hissed, the seal breaking with a gasp of pressurized air. The smell hit me first. I expected rot. I expected filth. But the air rushing out of Cell 101 smelled like nothing. Absolute, terrifying nothingness. It was a void in the atmosphere, cold and sterile, smelling faintly of copper and electricity. It was the smell of a lightning strike before the thunder rolls. "Move," the warden barked. I stepped into the dark. The cell was small, a cube of black metal no larger than my quarters. There was no bed, just a drain in the floor and the nutrient dispenser on the wall blinking with a malfunction error. And there in the corner was the threat. I had prepared myself for a monster. The lectures had warned us of warp-touched abominations, things with too many limbs, things that bled fire. I raised my shotgun, my finger tightening on the trigger, ready to blow apart a nightmare. But there was no monster. There was only a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He was frail, his ribs visible through the thin gray rags of the prisoner shift. His head was shaved just like mine, and the skin was pale translucent, veined with blue. He was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees to his chest. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a victim. He looked like my little brother before the fever took him. I froze. The shotgun barrel wavered. This is the enemy. This shivering child. "Clear the jam." "Acolyte," the warden roared from the doorway behind me. I stumbled toward the dispenser on the wall. I tried to focus on the machine, a simple clog in the paste tube. I reached out to clear it, my gauntlet scraping against the metal. But I could feel him. I could feel the boy behind me. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure on the back of my neck, a cold wind that ignored my armor. I fixed the machine. The light turned green. "Done. Get out." I turned to leave. And that was when he looked up. He didn't have the black eyes of the child in the induction bay. His eyes were blue. Piercing electric blue. They were too bright for the dark room. They glowed with an inner light that made my HUD flicker and spark with static interference. He didn't open his mouth. His lips were cracked and sealed with dried blood. But I heard him. The voice didn't come through my ears. It blossomed in the center of my brain, bypassing the auditory nerve entirely. It was soft, like falling snow. "It's cold," the voice said. "Why are you so cold, Kalen?" My name. He knew my name. I hadn't spoken it. The warden hadn't spoken it. My heart stopped. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. I stared at him, paralyzed. He wasn't looking at my armor. He was looking through it. He was looking at the scared 19-year-old boy hiding inside the ceramite shell. "You're afraid," the voice whispered, tinged with a terrible, innocent curiosity. "Why are you afraid I'm the one in the box?" "Acolyte." The senior warden's voice was a distant roar miles away. The boy tilted his head. A single tear of blood leaked from his left eye. "They cut my hair too," he thought at me. "Does it hurt you when they cut it?" It hurt me. I couldn't breathe. The pressure in my skull was building a rising scream that wasn't mine. I backed away, my boots skidding on the metal floor. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to say I didn't know. But the training kicked in. Rule 1. Silence. Rule 3. Ignorance. "Do not engage," the warden shouted. He grabbed my shoulder plate, his grip like a hydraulic clamp, and yanked me backward. I stumbled out of the cell. The warden slammed the door shut. The locking bolts fired home. Clang, clang, clang. The voice was cut off instantly like a wire had been severed. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was ringing. I leaned against the corridor wall, gasping for air that wouldn't come. My vision swam. I ripped my helmet off, violating protocol. I didn't care, and retched. I vomited thin acidic bile onto the pristine metal deck. I heaved until my ribs ached, trying to purge the feeling of that voice from my head. The senior warden stood over me. He didn't help me. He didn't reprimand me. He just watched his face a mask of cold disappointment. He knew my name. I gasped, wiping my mouth with the back of my gauntlet. He knew my name. They always know, the warden said. His voice was flat. That is why we cage them. Get up, acolyte. Clean this mess. Your shift is not over. He never looked at me, but I felt his gaze burn a hole in my soul. I ran to the wash station. I didn't know I could still run. I scrubbed the floor until the metal shone, but the stain remained in my mind. I had looked the enemy in the eye, and I hadn't seen a monster. I had seen a mirror, and that terrified me more than any demon ever could. The mess hall was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was a safe zone, a reinforced bunker deep within the crew decks where the psychic dampening fields were dialed up to maximum. The walls were thick layers of lead and consecrated ceramite, designed to block out the radiation of the souls we carried. But you cannot block out memory. You cannot erect a shield against the thing that is already inside your head. I sat at a long metal table staring at my tray. The nutrient paste was gray, gelatinous, and flavorless. It sat in my stomach like wet cement. Around me, 50 other wardens ate in silence. The only sound was the scraping of metal spoons against metal trays. Scrape, swallow, scrape, swallow. It was a rhythm of consumption devoid of pleasure. I looked at the faces around me. They were gaunt, their skin waxy under the harsh lumen strips. Their eyes were fixed on the middle distance, staring at nothing. Or perhaps they were staring at the things they tried not to see. The incident in Cell 101 had broken something in me. Before the ship's hum, that constant throbbing vibration of the psychic dampeners had been a background noise. It was annoying, like a persistent headache, but it was just a machine sound. Now it was different. The barrier in my mind had cracked. The hum wasn't just vibrating anymore. It was articulating. It started as an itch at the base of my neck, right where the null brand had been burned into my flesh. Then it moved to my ears. It wasn't a voice, not like the boy's voice. It was a chorus. It was the sound of 1,000 people whispering in a room next door. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the cadence. It rose and fell. It pleaded. It bargained. It sounded like my mother calling my name from the bottom of a well. I dropped my spoon. It clattered loudly on the tray, a gunshot in the library. A few heads turned. Most didn't. They were too lost in their own internal noise. But the man across from me looked up. He was an older warden, his face a roadmap of scars and nervous tics. He was rhythmically tapping his finger against the table. Tap, tap, tap. 3 times. Always 3 times. A ritual. A small spell to keep the madness away. You look pale, recruit, he whispered. His voice was barely audible, as if he was afraid to break the seal of the room. I rubbed my temples, trying to push the whispering back. The hum, I stammered. It's different today. It's talking. The older warden didn't look surprised. He didn't look sympathetic. He just stopped tapping his finger and leaned in, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked at me with a terrifying intensity. The hum is a privilege, he hissed. The hum means the dampeners are working. It means the Geller field is holding the warp back. It means the walls are still standing. He picked up his spoon and pointed it at me like a weapon. Worry when it stops, boy. The hum is the sound of the universe being kept out. If the hum stops, that means they got in. He went back to eating. Scrape, swallow. I looked around the room again with new eyes. I saw it now. The small movements. The warden 3 seats down was silently mouthing the litany of protection over and over her lips, moving in a frantic blur. Another was polishing his combat knife, rubbing the cloth against the steel until it must have been wearing the metal away. We weren't a disciplined military unit. We were a collection of broken things, holding ourselves together with rituals and denial. I tried to eat. I forced the gray sludge down my throat. I tried to listen to the scrape of the spoon instead of the whispers. I tried to build the wall back up, and then it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and the hum stopped. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet of a room. It was the silence of a vacuum. The pressure in the air vanished instantly, leaving a void that sucked the breath from our lungs. The whispers didn't stop, they screamed. For 3 terrible, beautiful seconds, the dampeners failed. Then the ship lurched. It was a violent, shuddering impact, as if we had hit a physical wall in the emptiness of space. Trays rattled. Men fell from their benches. The older warden looked at me. His eyes were filled with a chaotic terror. It stopped, he whimpered. Then the klaxons began to wail. The ship didn't just shake, it convulsed. It felt like the vessel had been seized by a giant invisible hand and shaken like a toy. I was thrown from the bench, hitting the deck hard. My tray clattered away, the metal spoon spinning across the floor. But the physical impact was nothing compared to the psychic one. When the Geller field flickered even for those 5 seconds, reality became thin. The walls of the mess hall seemed to stretch and breathe. The air turned instantly hot, smelling of ozone and copper, the scent of a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. And then came the smell of sulfur. Not the chemical kind, but the ancient rotting smell of something that has been burning for 1 billion years. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a washing, strobing crimson. It turned the pale faces of the other wardens into demonic masks. Men were screaming, clutching their heads. Some were bleeding from their noses and ears. The pressure in the room had spiked to crushing levels. It wasn't atmospheric pressure, it was soul pressure. The barrier between the material universe and the immaterium had thinned, and the ocean of madness outside was leaking in. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the spilled food and vomit. My head felt like it was being split open with a wedge. Geller field integrity. Critical, the ship's vox screamed. The voice was distorted, layered with static that sounded like weeping. Sector 4 containment breach. Psychic event in progress. All wardens to defensive protocols. Sector 4, that was my sector. That was where the boy was. I grabbed my helmet from the table and jammed it on. The seal hissed, and the HUD flickered to life, scrolling a waterfall of red warning runes. Sanity threat extreme. Psi index critical. The helmet filtered out the smell of sulfur, but it couldn't filter out the fear. The ship was groaning, the metal bulkhead screeching as the structural integrity fields fought against the tides of the warp. "Hold your line," the senior warden bellowed. He was standing on a table, his shock maul active, crackling with blue lightning. He looked like a statue of judgment amidst the chaos. Do not look at the walls. Do not listen to the voices. Eyes front, weapons free. I looked at the wall. I couldn't help it. The steel plating was sweating. A thick, dark liquid was oozing from the rivets. It wasn't oil, it was red. And as it ran down the metal, it didn't form puddles. It formed shapes, faces. Faces of people I had left behind. Faces of the dead. Move. Acolyte. The senior warden kicked a recruit who was curled up on the floor. To the spine. If we lose the containment deck, we lose the ship. We poured out of the mess hall and into the corridors. The run to Sector 4 was a blur of red light and terrifying noise. The hum of the dampeners was gone, replaced by a sound that defied description. It was a roar, a cacophony of 1,000 minds screaming in unison. The cargo had woken up. The flicker had touched them. The protective coma of the dampeners was broken, and now every psyker on the deck was a live conduit for the energy of the warp. The blast doors to the spine were warping the metal bulging outward, as if something massive was pushing from the other side. We slammed into position, forming a firing line. My shotgun was slippery in my hands. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was vibrating with the ship. "They are coming," the man next to me whispered. It was the older warden, the one who tapped his finger. He wasn't tapping now. He was staring at the bulging door with a look of ecstatic terror. The walls are bleeding, boy. Not blood. Memories. The door groaned, the locking mechanism screaming as the bolts began to shear. "Here they come," I whispered, and then the door blew open. The blast door didn't open. It disintegrated. Shrapnel the size of dinner plates sighed through the air, ricocheting off the bulkheads with the screech of tortured metal. I threw myself flat, the heat of the explosion searing the back of my neck. Smoke, thick and oily, billowed into the corridor, instantly blinding us. But through the smoke, the screams came. They weren't the screams of an army. They were the screams of the insane, the terrified, the possessed. I saw shapes moving in the haze, limbs that were two long shadows that flickered like strobe lights. I raised my shotgun, my finger shaking on the trigger. "Hold fire, the senior warden!" roared his voice, cutting through the chaos. "Clear the lane, make way for the Talons." I didn't understand. We were the line. If we moved, the ship would fall. But the other wardens were scrambling back, pressing themselves against the walls, their heads bowed in a mixture of reverence and nausea. I dragged myself backward, looking down the corridor. And then, I felt them. It wasn't fear. Fear is hot. Fear makes your heart race. This was absence. It was a sudden, violent subtraction of the soul. The temperature didn't drop, but I felt frozen. The panic in my mind was suddenly silenced, replaced by a primal reptilian revulsion. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to tear my eyes out. I wanted to run, not from the monsters in the smoke, but from the golden figures emerging from the rear guard. They walked in silence. The Sisters of Silence. They were tall, clad in burnished gold armor that seemed to catch light where there was none. They wore high topknots and cloaks of fur, and they moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was entirely inhuman. They carried no guns. They carried great two-handed swords and flamers attached to their gauntlets. They didn't shout. They didn't communicate. They simply existed, and their existence was an insult to the warp. The screaming from the smoke faltered. The shadows recoiled. The monsters knew what was coming. The sisters didn't run. They flowed into the breach. The first wave of cargo twisted, wailing things that had once been men threw themselves at the golden line. The sisters didn't break stride. Great swords flashed in unison, a wall of spinning monofilament edges. Blood sprayed the ceiling black and viscous. Heads rolled. Limbs were severed with surgical precision. It wasn't combat. It was harvesting wheat. Then came the fire. The sisters raised their gauntlets. Streams of promethium, blessed and purified, roared into the darkness. The orange light was blinding. The smell of burning meat mixed with the sulfur and ozone, creating a stench that would never leave my nostrils. I watched as the fire washed over the cells. I watched as the monsters burned. And as they burned, I saw them for what they were. A woman clutching a locket. A man shielding his face. They weren't demons. They were just broken people ignited by a power they didn't ask for, and now extinguished by a power that didn't care. "Secure the breach," a voice barked. It wasn't a sister, they never spoke. It was an inquisitor striding behind them, his face hidden by a rebreather mask. He pointed a gloved finger at me. "You Warden seal Sector 4. I stared at him. Sector 4 was the boys' sector. The fire was raging inside, but the blast doors were still open. If I sealed it, the fire suppression systems would fail. The oxygen would feed the flames until everything inside was ash. But the cells, I shouted, my voice cracking. They are still alive inside." The Inquisitor turned to me. His eyes were cold, hard flint. "There are no lives in there, Acolyte. Only kindling for the Emperor's wrath. Seal it, or join them." I looked at the control panel on the wall. My hand hovered over the rune-marked button. Through the smoke and the flames, I thought I saw a pair of blue eyes. I thought I heard a voice, small and terrified, cutting through the roar of the Prometheum. "Why are you so cold, Kaylin?" A sister of silence stopped beside me. She didn't look at the fire. She looked at me. Up close, the aura of her soullessness was unbearable. My vision blurred. My stomach heaved. She reached out a golden gauntlet and rested it near my hand. She didn't touch me if she had. I think I would have died, but the message was clear. Her face was a mask of absolute, terrifying serenity. She raised a finger to her lips. Hush. There was no mercy in her eyes. There was no cruelty either. There was only the duty, the terrible, heavy, necessary duty. I looked back at the fire. I looked at the shadows writhing in the flames. I looked at the Inquisitor's pistol leveled at my head. I made my choice. I didn't choose the boy. I didn't choose the right thing. I chose to live. I slammed my fist onto the button. The hydraulic locks engaged with a thunderous crash. The heavy blast doors slammed together, cutting off the roar of the fire, the smell of the burning, and the screams. The silence returned, sudden and absolute. The sister lowered her hand. The Inquisitor holstered his weapon. I stood there, my hand still resting on the cold metal of the control panel. I waited for the guilt to crush me. I waited for the tears. But they didn't come. I felt lighter. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean like a gourd. I realized then that the senior warden was right. Empathy is a flaw. Mercy is a weakness. The only way to survive the black ship is to become like the ship itself, cold, hard, and empty. I sealed the door, and the part of me that wanted to scream died with them. The silence returned, but it was different now. Before the silence was a vacuum, a terrifying absence of noise that threatened to suck the air from your lungs. Now the silence was heavy. It was a physical weight, like a wet wool blanket draped over the soul. It was the silence of a graveyard after the mourners have gone home. I stood in the corridor of Sector 4. The blast doors were sealed, fused shut by the heat of the sisters' flamers. The metal was still radiating warmth, a dull, dry heat that prickled against my armor. The air smelled of wet ash, burnt ozone, and the chemical tang of the cleaning fluids we were spraying on the deck. I held the high-pressure hose. The water jet hissed against the metal, scrubbing away the black sludge that coated the floor. I didn't ask what the sludge was. It didn't matter. It was just organic residue. It was carbon. It was waste. I watched the black water swirl into the drainage grates. Swish. Gurgle. Gone. My arms ached from the recoil of the hose, but the pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I was floating somewhere above my own body, looking down at the armored figure doing the work. "Sector 4, clear," I said into the Vox. My voice was flat. No tremors, no hesitation. Just the report. "Proceed to secondary debris removal," the senior warden replied. He didn't yell anymore. There was no need. We understood each other. We were the survivors. We were the machine. I walked toward the blackened shell of Cell 101. The paint on the wall had peeled away in curling strips, revealing the raw steel beneath. On the floor, near the seam of the blast door, something caught the light. I knelt down. My servo-assisted joints whirred softly. I picked it up. It was small, scorched, a lump of twisted plastic and metal. It might have been a toy once, maybe a soldier, maybe a beast. It was hard to tell. It was warm to the touch, retaining the heat of the fire that had consumed its owner. I turned it over in my gauntleted hand. I waited for the grief. I waited for the memory of the blue eyes, the voice in my head, the feeling of the boy's fear. I waited for the tears that I had held back for days, but nothing came. I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no guilt. Just a mild clinical curiosity. Item contraband. Status destroyed. Action dispose. I stood up and walked to the disposal chute set into the wall. I held the object over the opening. For a second, a ghost of a memory flickered. a thought that this was a person's life, that this blackened lump was the last evidence that a boy named, whatever his name was, had ever existed. But the thought was weak. It was like smoke in a gale. I opened my hand. The object fell into the dark. I didn't hear it hit the bottom. I pressed the flush button. A distant roar of the incinerator answered. I looked down at my belt. My key sigil, the symbol of my office, was swinging against my hip. It used to be silver polished to a mirror shine. Now it was black. The heat and the smoke had stripped away the plating, leaving only the dull, pitted iron underneath. It looked ugly. It looked strong. It looked like me. I ran my thumb over the rough metal of the key. It felt right. The silver was a lie. The polish was a lie. This iron, this soot, this numbness, this was the truth. The universe isn't a place of heroes and monsters. It is a place of fuel and fire. And I was no longer the fuel. I resumed my patrol. The dampener hum kicked back in, rising to its full, headache-inducing strength. It whined and throbbed, drilling into the base of my skull. Before I had hated it. Now it sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like order. I checked my internal chronometer. 4 hours left in the shift. I checked the door seals. Door 101. Sealed. Door 102. Sealed. I walked the line. Left foot. Right foot. Click, clack. The rhythm was perfect. I had finally learned the vow of silence. It wasn't about keeping your mouth shut. It was about realizing that there was nothing left to say. They summoned me to the upper deck. It is a place we rarely go. The air there is different, thinner, colder, and filtered to a purity that tastes chemically sweet. It is where the inquisitors walk. It is where the judgments are handed down. I stood in a room that was entirely circular, the walls paneled in dark, sound-dampening wood, a luxury that cost more than my entire hive block back home. But there was no comfort here. There was only the dark and the eye. In the center of the room, suspended from a mess of cables and hydraulic arms, hung a massive sensory unit. It looked like the head of a giant insect, stripped of its flesh, leaving only brass and glass. A single, large optical lens glowed in the center, a burning, unblinking red iris. It whirred softly as it focused on me. I stood at a tension helmet tucked under my arm, my other hand resting on the pommel of my shock maul. I stared into the red light. It didn't blind me. It felt like it was scanning the back of my retinas, reading the electrical firing patterns of my brain. "State your designation." The voice came from the shadows behind the machine. It wasn't the gravelly voice of the wardens. It was smooth, high-pitched, almost musical. It was a voice that had never screamed in panic. "Warden Kalen, designation 774 Sigma," I replied. My voice was steady. It didn't echo in the dampened room. "You were present at the breach in Sector 4, the voice said. "You were the first responder to Cell 101. You engaged the locking mechanism during the purge." I did. "Describe the cargo in Cell 101. I didn't blink. The red eye zoomed in the lens, spiraling with a soft click, click, click. It was looking for a micro-expression. It was looking for a twitch of the lip, a dilation of the pupil, any sign of the boy. The blue eyes, the voice that had made me weep in the corridor. I searched my mind for those things. I found them, but they were frozen, encased in the ice of my new indifference. The cargo was a Level 3 psyker, unsanctioned. "Unstable," I said. It attempted to establish a telepathic link. It used sensory manipulation to project an image of innocence. And how did you respond? I terminated the link. I followed protocol. I sealed the bulkhead to ensure the efficiency of the sisters' work. The machine whirred. A mechanical arm extended a needle-tipped probe hovering inches from my face. It sniffed the air, analyzing my pheromones. It was smelling for guilt. It was smelling for cortisol, the chemical scent of stress. "Do you feel remorse, Warden?" the voice asked softly. It was a trap. If I said yes, I was weak. If I said no, I might be a sociopath. But I wasn't guessing the answer. I was speaking the truth. "Remorse implies an error," I said. "I made no error. The cargo was a threat to the ship. The threat was neutralized. Remorse is inefficient, Lord. I feel only the need to serve." There was a long silence. The probe retracted. The red eye dimmed slightly, its angry pulse slowing to a steady rhythmic glow. From the shadows, I heard the scratch of a stylus on parchment. It was a dry, archaic sound. "Inefficient," the voice repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that is the correct conclusion." The lights in the room rose slightly, revealing the speaker. He was a small man, withered and pale, sitting in a hover chair. He wore the rosette of the Inquisition on a chain around his neck. He looked at me, not with admiration, but with the satisfaction of a craftsman who has successfully forged a blade. "You came to us a boy," Kalen the analyst said, "full of dreams about the Schola, full of empathy. We have burned that out of you. And what is left is pure." He tapped a key on his data slate. The red eye clicked off. The darkness of the room felt less oppressive but more empty. "You are cleared for duty. In fact, you are recommended for promotion. The black ships need men who understand the necessity of the seal. You are ready." I saluted. It was a sharp mechanical motion. "Thank you, Lord." I turned and walked out of the chamber. As the door hissed shut behind me, I touched my chest. My heart was beating slowly, steadily. Thump. Thump. It was a calm rhythm. I wasn't ready. Being ready implies preparation for something you understand. I was something else. I was empty. I was a hollow vessel scrubbed clean of the messy, painful things that make a human being. And as I walked back to the lift, descending into the dark belly of the ship, I knew they were about to fill me with a new purpose. I wasn't a jailer anymore. I was the prison. The vibration changed first. For months, or perhaps years, I had lost track the ship had been under the stress of the warp drive. It was a constant bone-shaking shudder that rattled your teeth and blurred your vision. But then the engine pitch shifted. The deep, guttural roar faded into a smooth, high-whining hum of sublight thrusters. The artificial gravity reoriented with a sickening lurch. We were decelerating. We were real space. "All hands to stations," the Vox chimed. "Arrival sequence initiated. Prepare for docking." I was on the bridge, not commanding it. Of course, I was just security detail for the blast doors. But I could see the viewports. The shutters, which had been sealed tight for the entire voyage to prevent us from looking into the madness of the warp, were slowly grinding open. Light flooded the bridge. It wasn't the sickly red of the emergency lumens. It wasn't the cold blue of the monitors. It was gold. It was a searing, blinding gold that pierced the gloom of the bridge like a spear. I narrowed my eyes behind my visor, the auto dimmer struggling to compensate. There, hanging in the void, was a planet. It was shrouded in a thick brown smog of industry glowing with the lights of 1 trillion souls. It looked like a jewel that had been dropped in the mud, but it still shone with a terrifying majesty. Terra, the throne world, the center of the galaxy. "Look at it," Acolyte, the senior warden, murmured. He was standing beside me, his helmet off. His face was gray and lined, but his eyes were wet. "Holy Terra, it's bright," I said. That was all I could manage. The light hurt. After so long in the dark, the radiance of the capital felt like an assault. "Do not be deceived," the senior warden said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The light is a mask. The true black ships, they never leave this place. This is where the tithe ends. This is where the fuel is spent." We docked at the Somnus Citadel, a fortress orbiting high above the atmosphere. The clamps engaged with a sound like thunder. The airlock cycled, then began the offloading. I stood guard at the main ramp. The cargo that had survived the journey was brought up from the depths. They were different now. The ones who had screamed were silent. The ones who had fought were broken. They were chained together in long, shuffling lines, wearing hoods that covered their faces. They didn't look like people. They looked like ghosts wrapped in rags. They were flanked by the Custodes giants in gold armor, who moved with the weight of gods, and the Sisters of Silence. The presence of the Custodes made even the senior warden kneel. I went to one knee, my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the deck. I felt the vibration of their boots as they passed. Thud, thud. It was the sound of absolute power. I watched the last of the prisoners walk down the ramp, a small figure stumbling under the weight of the chains. For a moment the hood slipped. I didn't see a face. I saw a bandage where eyes used to be. The figure paused, tilting its head, as if listening to something far away. Then a sister shoved it forward, and the figure vanished into the golden light of the docking bay. I stood up. The ramp was empty. The ship was empty. The mission was complete. "Is it over?" I asked the senior warden. He looked at me, then looked out at the sprawling, smog-choked sphere of terror below us. He smiled, a grim, mirthless stretching of scars. Over he chuckled. "No, Kalen. The tithe is never over. The Emperor must eat. And we must go back to the dark to find him more spoons." I watched the ramp close. The light of Terra was cut off slice by slice until the darkness of the ship returned. It felt familiar. It felt safe. I turned my back on the throne world. I didn't belong in the light anymore. My place was here in the cold metal belly of the beast. The debriefing room was stark white. It was the only room on the ship that wasn't gray or black. It hurt my eyes. I stood before a desk made of polished obsidian. Behind it sat an official of the Astra Telepathica. He wasn't a soldier. He was a bureaucrat. His robes were silk. His fingers were soft and stained with ink. He looked at a data slate, then up at me. "Warden Kalen," he said, "your tour is complete. You have survived your first voyage. Survival rate for this rotation was 64%. You are in the upper percentile." He tapped the slate. "You have a choice. By the laws of the tithe, you are permitted to return to your home world. You will be granted a pension. You will be granted status. You can go back to the hive. You can see your family." He paused, waiting for my reaction. I thought about the hive. I thought about the humidity, the smell of recycled sweat, the noise of the crowds. I thought about my father twisting his cap in his hands. I tried to picture his face. It was a blur. I tried to remember the feeling of wanting to go to the Schola. It felt like a memory from a different life, a story told about someone else. If I went back, what would I say? How would I explain the silence? How would I explain that when I look at a child, I don't see a person, I see a potential breach? How would I sleep without the hum? I looked at my reflection in the black obsidian of the desk. The man staring back was gaunt. His skin was pale as paper. His eyes were sunk deep into dark sockets. He wore the black armor like a second skin. He didn't look like Kalen. Kalen was the boy who boarded the transport. Kalen died in cell 101. Well, the official asked, sounding bored. "The transport leaves in an hour. Do you wish to be discharged?" I looked at my hands. They were steady, they were cold. "No," I said. The official stopped tapping. He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "No, Kalen is gone," I said softly. "There is only the duty. I request reassignment. Reassignment. Put me back on the line," I said. "Put me back on the walk." The official stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. It wasn't a nod of respect. It was the nod of a man filing a piece of paper. "Very well, sign here." He pushed a parchment toward me. I picked up the stylus. I signed the name Kalen, but it was just a collection of letters. A code. An index number. "You are dismissed, Warden," he said. I turned and walked out. The corridor outside was dark. The hum of the dampeners was faint here, but I could hear it. I started to walk toward the barracks. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I just walked. Click-clack. Click-clack. I listened to the sound of my boots. It was the only music I needed. I had signed the paper. I had asked to stay. Because the truth was the only thing worse than being on a black ship, was remembering it. I found my quarters. The same metal coffin. I stepped inside. The door hissed shut, locking with a heavy thud. The silence wrapped around me. I sat on the bunk. I picked up my pistol and a cleaning rag. I began to disassemble the weapon, strip the slide, check the spring, oil the barrel. The war would continue. It always did. I kept cleaning the pistol. There was nothing else to do. And in the dark, with the hum of the machine as my only company, I was finally free.